Hello, everybody. It's Monday, 7 o'clock. It's time for Career Catalyst Live. Join us in the room. If you're here, give me a hashtag live. If you are watching the replay, give me a hashtag replay. Let me know you're here. All right. So today we are talking about money, specifically money problems when it comes to your job search. And this is something that somebody who's currently in a role can also use because, I mean, if you like to get paid for your work, you need to know what those pay ranges mean, right? So yeah, so they were talking about pay ranges and the biggest trap that you can fall into when it comes to pay ranges. Um, First, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Angela M. Zachary. I am the owner of a business called the Inside Track Career Services, and I use little known HR strategies to help job seekers simplify their job searches. And pay ranges, one of those strategies. So I know you've probably heard it all over the place about how employers need to post a pay range, right? Post a range, post a range, post a range. I see it all the time. And in a lot of state, or not a lot, but in some states and cities and counties even, there are laws in place about posting the pay range because an informed candidate is a good candidate, right? But if you know the pay range, but you don't know what it means, it's not worth anything to you. And that is the case for a lot of people. They can see the pay range, but they don't actually know what it means. And without the context that goes into a pay range, you're just looking at some numbers. You're just looking at digits on a page and they don't mean anything. So that's what we're doing today. We're giving context to it so that you don't fall into these traps about trying to max your payout in the pay range. And so if you've heard me before, you already know, like I say, try to get as much as you can on the front end because it's going to be harder when you're actually an employee. And I do mean that, even though I am telling you now, that is not always good to try to strive for the top of the pay range. It is still good to try to get yourself in a good position because there's a chance that you'll be there for a while. So with that said, let me give you some information about what a pay range actually is. So a pay range is a real simple thing. It's the dollar amount that is a set of dollar amounts that an employer pays for a role. There can be a lot of jobs that they use that one pay range for, or it could be for one specific job. It depends on the organization's structure. But a pay range is the amount of money that they're going to pay for the job. Okay. A pay range has three main markers, right? So it has a minimum. The minimum is the least that they will most likely pay. And when I say most likely, I mean that in almost every case, the employer is going to try to get their employees at least to this number, right? Whether that's an annual salary or an hourly rate, they're going to try to get their employees to that number. And when I say try, that's because there are instances where maybe there's an on-call employee and they're not going to spend as much time trying to get that person up to the minimum of the pay grade, because if they've got regular employees, they're going to use that money to get those regular employees there. But in most cases that are not like a on-call employee, they're going to try to get that employee there. And there are folks in HR who try to impress upon managers the importance of keeping people at least at that number. Okay, so that's the minimum. Then you have a midpoint. The midpoint, and I'm going by order of what you would see on a pay range, but the midpoint is simply the middle of the pay range, right? So above the minimum, it's the middle of the pay range. And then the last data point or last marker you have in a pay range is the maximum of that pay range. That means in most cases, this is the most that they will pay for the job. So the minimum is the least they agree to pay. The maximum is the most that they will pay in most circumstances. And most circumstances mean for most employees, that's where they're going to land. And that is where they will stay. So between this minimum and this maximum, if you are in this job, you will never go under the minimum and you will never go over the maximum. That is the rule of a pay range, right? There are some situations where maybe an employer is trying to promote an employee And because they want to promote them to another job that is in a different pay range, they might try to bump them up to the top of the pay range or out of the pay range so that they can get closer to that next, so they get closer to the next pay range. So that is one reason why they might come outside of it. But for the majority of people and in the majority of cases, you're going to be somewhere in that range, right? So that's what a pay range is. Oh, it's so simple. It's so simple. Um, so a range, and I'll actually yeah, I'll say this later, but a range tends to be for at least professional jobs around 50% spread. So we're going to talk about what a spread is. And the term itself is somewhat self-explanatory. It's like if you spread out a blanket from one side to the other, that's how wide the blanket is, right? So the pay range spread is how wide the range is from minimum to maximum. And for a lot of professional jobs, that's around 50%. It could be 30, it could be 60, depending on the organization. But whatever the range is, that's how they set up salaries within the minimum and the maximum, right? So a 50% spread means there's 50% above that minimum, okay? Now I'll say this before I get on to the math part. So if you got a calculator, time to get your calculator out. But in places where there are laws about showing pay ranges, there are not always clear rules about what employers have to actually show. So when you say show the pay range, well, the question one like me would ask is, which part? Which part of the pay range? Because I don't have to show you the whole pay range. I could show you a percentage of the pay range where I think that I will likely pay the person who's going to do this specific job for me. So that could be not the entire pay range. I could show you the middle of the pay range, somewhere around the midpoint. I mean, they probably won't do that because they won't want to pay you for that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I could just show you the first half of the pay range. So from the minimum to the midpoint, I can do that because for the most part, there are not rules stating that they have to actually show you the whole range. And when that is not the case, that means that you are not getting all the information that you need from that range. Even if you are watching this live and you know, okay, so this is what goes into a pay range. If they're not showing you the whole thing, you still don't actually know what room they have to work in. You just know what the information they are giving you. And while that's a good thing for the employer so that they can protect their range, it's not the best for you because you want to be able to be as informed as possible, right? So let's do a little math, right? To figure out a spread. And when you know the spread of a pay range, you can start to figure out where the numbers lie, okay? So I'm going to say, and just as a foundational element, the majority of the time you're going to be able to get the minimum, but not the midpoint or the max, right? Because there's no employer who wants to pay you more if they don't have to. So they're more likely to give you the minimum or something close to it than they are to give you the max of the actual pay range. And that's really important because if you see a maximum on a published pay range and the spread is small, so say you see a job and the range is $90,000 to $100,000, that is not the full range because that spread is way too small to actually encompass every employee that might be in this job. So just when you look at pay ranges, have that in mind. What part of the pay range am I actually seeing? And when you do see a minimum in a range, think about it also in terms of what the market says about this job. Always say do your own mini market analysis. So if you are looking at these similar jobs and you're seeing pay ranges from other employers, what do those minimums tend to look like? You can even Google it, and the salary sources might not be 100% reliable or 100% current, but it gives you something to work with because some information is better than no information, especially when it's at least reasonably current. Okay. So just understand that if you're looking at a range and it's really short, that's because it's not the entire range. And so knowing the spread will help you figure out what part of the range you're actually looking at. And then that'll help you make better decisions when it comes time to telling them what salary you want, or even with negotiating. Okay. So we're going to say that the minimum salary is $80,000. Okay. I'm going to make this super simple. $80,000. And because this is a professional job, I'm going to assume that the pay spread, or the range spread, is 50%. Just gonna assume to make it easier. It could, like I said, be 40, it could be 60, it could be whatever they want it to be. It'll be based on market, as in how similar employers pay for the job. But let's just say this employer is going to pay a 50% spread, and from the minimum to the max, it's going to be 50%. Okay, so you're going to have to find the other two data points that I mentioned, the midpoint and the maximum, right? Because that's the only way you're going to have the whole range. So to get that the midpoint, you're going to take your minimum and get your calculator and your paper and pencil, because lots of dollars and stuff. Anyway, you're going to take your minimum and you're going to multiply that by 1 plus half of the spread. So the spread is 50%. So that number is 0.5. We're going to use half the spread, and it'll be 0.25, because that's half of 0.5. So 80,000 times 1.25 is $100,000. So now we have a midpoint. Great. Midpoints mean something, and we're going to get to that. But now we have a midpoint. When you want to get the maximum, you're going to take your minimum again and multiply it by 1 plus the full spread. So that's 1.5. 80 times 1.5. $120,000. So now we have a full range, right? Whether the employer gave it to us or not. Now, by you doing this math, and we can plot in whatever range we want, not range, whatever spread that we want. But after you do that, now you have created a range that the employer might be using. You don't know which one they're using, but because you know the math, you can now start to map it out, to cost it out yourself, right? So now our range is 80,000, 100,000 in the middle, 120K as the maximum, right? So that is the room that you have theoretically to work in, okay? And you know where you have room to fall. So you've done the math, you know the range. Now I want to start talking about what each of these actually means in terms of the types of salaries. Oh, I bit my tongue. The types of salaries that you can command, right? So the minimum is a start, right? 2 types of employees that are going to end up there. The entry-level employees who are just learning this job. They can't be left alone. You got to train them, all that stuff. They're likely going to come in at the lowest level because they don't have experience and they have not proven that they could do the job, right? Or, in a lot of companies, this is true, a lot of companies will take just any new hire, regardless of their credentials, regardless of their experience, regardless of how good they probably will be at the job. A lot of them will start the employees at the base. Probably not a great practice, because most employees who have experience are not going to want to start there. But that is the practice of a lot of employers. And these types of employers tend to lose good talent because of that. But because you are aware of what the range is, you can tell when you are being brought in toward the base. So, okay, those 2 employees might be brought in at the base or very close to it. The midpoint is for employees, number 1, existing employees who have proven themselves, have become fully proficient in the work. You can give them something and leave them alone, and they'll do it. They perform well. Those types of employees are going to be somewhere around that midpoint, because it's a progression, okay? So a range is a progression, right? Having those types of employees at the base doesn't make any sense, because they've already done the work and proven and shown their performance, right? So those people are going to be somewhere around the midpoint, not exactly always, but somewhere around the midpoint. Your max is for folks who have been there normally forever, right? They've been there a while. They're very good at their jobs. and or they are about to be promoted to a higher level, and the employer just wants to get them, or the manager just wants to get them closer to the next highest pay range. And there are gaps in between pay ranges. And so they try to get them higher so that when they do promote, they can get them into the next range without spending $40,000 at one time, for instance. So those are the two types of folks that'll be there. So if you have, like domain skills, or a lot of intense knowledge in a field and they cannot do without it, then they will also cross the midpoint and get up into that higher half of the pay range for someone like you. So that sounds awesome, right? It sounds great. Everybody wants to be past the midpoint. It's like a flex. It just makes you feel good. I'm over the midpoint, right? But the issue there, and I always talk about longevity. I always talk about I want you to make the best decisions when you start the job so that you can continue on with making those good decisions, right? Part of the problem about trying to get in at or above the midpoint happens after you've already started, right? This is probably something, because you just want to get the job. It feels good to just get the job, right? But when you come in past or at or above the midpoint, at that level, when the higher you get in a pay range, the closer salaries tend to get. If employers have steps between, the closer they are. So there's less differentiation between you, between the levels than there was below the midpoint. If you got an increase below the midpoint, it'd probably be higher, right? It gets smaller and smaller the higher you go up, because now you're getting up close to the max of this range. And like I said, this is the most the employer is willing to pay for this particular job. So generally, the only thing you could do to get above it is to find another job within the company that is higher level. That could be a promotion, it could be an internal hire, but either way, that would be the main way to get above that range, because they said that's the most they're willing to pay, right? In the majority of cases, that is true. So let's say you come. Oh, and another thing, sorry. The higher you get, like the closer you get toward the maximum, your increases get smaller and smaller typically, because they don't want you to go over the max. But also, some employers start to pay closer attention to what you're paid once you get past the midpoint of the grade. And the reason is, like I said, there's a max. So they need to make sure you don't go over it, because this is the type of work you're doing, and this is the range that is assigned to that type of work. Once you start going over it, now they start to say, okay, well, why is this person going over it but nobody else? So it starts to draw questions, right? And a lot of employers will stop merit increases at a certain level. So you got to be mindful of that. Like, maybe you're okay with just getting a bonus for the next 10 years because you haven't been promoted or haven't moved to another job, but a lot of us are not. And so you have to remember that as well. The closer you get, the smaller your increases, and typically, if there are steps anyway, and the harder it is for an employer to justify merit increases for you. Okay, so let's just do an example, right? Say you were so good in your process. You had an excellent job search coach like myself, and you were so good in your process that they decided, screw it, we're gonna give her $110,000, right? That's gonna be a salary. And this is the range we're talking about that we just mentioned. So the midpoint of the range we said is $100,000. The max is $120,000, and they just brought you in, you gold star, at $110,000. And so you're patting yourself on the back because you did great. Like you did great. But the thing, so the next year, say when you're eligible for a merit increase anyway, it could be the same year, it could be the next year, it depends. But you did really well. The manager wanted to give you a 5% increase. They gave you a 5% increase. Okay, so we're multiplying your salary by 5%. And adding that together, you are now making $115,000, $115,500, right? Very good. Good for you. But we just said the max of this range is $120,000. So now you're $4,500 below the max, which looks good, feels like a flex. But we said the max is the most that they will pay, right? Next year comes around, you're still doing very well. And your employer's like, well, I want to give them a 5% increase, but here's the problem. A 5% increase is over the max of the range, right? And we can't go over the max without a very good reason. You're not ready for a promotion. At least they don't think you are. Maybe you don't even want a promotion, right? So now they're having to start make some decisions, right? Do I give a 5% increase? No, I don't want them to go over the max of the range. If I do, HR is going to chase me around the building. So I can't give them 5%. Okay, well, I'll give them 2. So now here you are at the low 2% increase that a lot of people end up getting. And you're upset and you're ready to go out the door, right? Only been there for maybe 2 years, because your starting salary, while wonderful and while high, means that you don't get to move anymore. And that is the unfortunate trap that happens with pay ranges, is that once we see the range, we always want the max of the range, but I want you to be mindful of what it means when you end up there. And chances are it means that you're going to be there for a minute, or it's going to be more difficult for your employer to give you increases, and you'll have to do things like get promotions, essentially, or be so dang good that the VP of the organization tells HR to just give it to you, right? And for some people, that's the case, but for most people, it's not, right? So how do you avoid this? Get the minimum if you can. Try to find the minimum of the pay range, whether that's using the range that they have set and deciding, okay, that's probably the minimum, or doing some market research, like I always say, or simply just asking the recruiter, hey, what's the minimum of this range, right? If you can get this number, then you can find the rest of the range and you can start to make better decisions about how much you'll make. Then do the math. Just do the math. Like the folks like me who are making these ranges are simply just doing some math to figure out how much we're going to pay for these jobs. We're looking at the market and we're doing the math. So if you do those two things and you are realistic about what this job is asking for and how well you align with that, you can also start to think, based on what I know about what kind of employee ends up at the minimum, the max, and the midpoint, I can start to make decisions about where I feel like I'll end up. And you can make better decisions based on that. Okay. So I am thinking about creating something for compensation for job seekers, right? What you need to know to make better decisions. And if you see this and you're like, hey, I need to know that, just put compensation in the chat and I will create it. I'm not gonna make it if y'all don't want to know it, because I know it. Like, I know it. But if you don't want it, okay, cool. Make your decisions however you like. But those of you who are interested in being paid and being paid wisely for your work, go ahead and put that in the chat. And I'll create it and then let you all know when it's ready. So thanks so much. Remember, don't max out yourself too soon, okay? It's not wise. And I want you to be able to have some longevity, right? Not making the same salary for the next 7 years because you came in so high. Okay. And maybe next week we'll talk about equity. That's another juicy compensation topic. But all right. Good night, everybody. Bye.